Hey everybody, hope you're having a great day. Welcome back to another Web Dev Junkie video. My name is Cody Seibert, and in this video, what I'm going to be sharing with you is a tutorial about how to build a paste bin clone, basically. So it's going to be really basic. Let me just share with you the UI that we're going to be building. So here we have the home page, which is using Bootstrap to kind of style the page. And when you hit the home page, it just basically gives you a description of what the site is. It just says that this is a site that you can store some text. And when a user hits the site, they can click either create your snippet here, or there's also a button here. These both redirect the user to the same create snippet page. So on this page, someone can type in some, I don't know, either code or text or whatever they want. So here is some text, and they can click create a snippet. And so once they do that, this text or whatever they wanted to save is persisted to a MongoDB database, and anyone else who has this URL can access this snippet. So this is just a random slug, or UID, I guess you could say. And this is the identifier for the snippet, so that if I were to click on this button here, it'll copy the snippet, and I can just paste it into my browser or share it on the internet or give it to a friend if I just wanted to share some code real quick. So that is what we're going to be building in this tutorial, and there's a couple of technologies that are really good to understand. We're going to be using Next.js just to do the server-side rendering to show these different routes and pages, and we're using MongoDB to store a single model, which just basically has some text in that random slug. So this isn't necessarily the MERN stack, this is just Next.js with a MongoDB database. Alright, so starting off, I have a folder that is blank called Next Mongo Pastebin. And if we wanted to set up a Next.js project, we can do npx create next app, and then use dot to tell it to use this directory. And that will install some dependencies, and when this is done running, we're going to install a couple of more dependencies. So that is done installing our dependencies. You can see over here on the left, we have a Next project kind of set up. And there's a couple of more dependencies we want to install, and I might have to go to the docs to actually understand them. Just make sure we're doing it correctly. But the first one we want to install is Bootstrap. And then we also want React Bootstrap. And we're using those two libraries to kind of style the page and just, allow us to develop at a quicker pace so that we don't waste a lot of time doing CSS. And there's another package called Clipboard Copy, which I'm going to grab. And that's used for kind of just pasting some text into the user's clipboard, because that can get kind of complicated if you want to do it by JavaScript by hand. And I think there's one more library that we need called Random String. So let's just go ahead and install all those dependencies. And again, when this is done, we'll just go ahead and get started. There's I did forget to install Mongoose, so I'm going to do that when this finishes. All right, so those are done installing. And lastly, let's just do an install on Mongoose. And this is kind of a library that can act as the middleware between your service talking to MongoDB. One thing I will mention is that I already have MongoDB set up and running on this laptop, so I can connect to it and start storing information into a MongoDB database. So I definitely go to the MongoDB site and download that and install that if you want to follow this tutorial. I'm not going to be doing that for you all here. So now when that's all done, we have Next set up, we have our dependencies we need set up. What I'm going to do is just do npm run dev, and that's going to host our Next.js site at localhost 3000. So if I go over to my browser and refresh the page, you will see that we have an initial bare bones Next.js project set up. And let's just start developing on it. So let's first with just kind of setting up and installing Bootstrap so that we can start using some of those styles. So let's go into the pages folder, and this is kind of where you define all your different pages and routes in Next.js. And underscore app.js is like the main top level, and this is a good place to import Bootstrap. All right, so inside of the docs, it basically tells you that you can import it like this. Let me zoom in a little bit if the case that's too small. So import it like that, and we can just put that at the top of our underscore app.js, and that should enable our next site to work with Bootstrap. And you might have noticed that the text has changed a little bit, and that is a good sign that Bootstrap is working. So let's start with the header. Most websites have some type of header that explains, the logo of your application and maybe some links that you can click, like a home link. So let's go ahead and put the header inside of this component here. Probably a good starting place. So I'm going to wrap this in a React fragments. And inside of here, I'm going to just go ahead and try to insert a Bootstrap header. So let's go to the Bootstrap docs, because when you're developing for real, you're going to be using docs. So let's go to, there's something called navbar, and let's look at some examples. I just want to use a really basic nav bar with maybe a link or two. So let's see if they have an example, and they do. This one looks pretty good. So we're going to grab the first example here and just copy it right into our app. All right, so now that we have the nav bar pasted in here, let's go ahead and try to auto import these things. So the auto import is not working for some reason. I might have to restart my VS Code, but I'm just going to go ahead and manually import these. So I can import navbar, import nav, import form, and form control. And these are all going to be imported from React Bootstrap. So once I've done that, I should be able to go to my app, and we see a header up here. Let me zoom in a little bit. So we got a header, we got some links, we also have some search and a search button. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take out the search input because we're not going to use it, and then the search button I'm just going to put probably to the right of home. So I'm going to take the button, put it to the right of home. I'm going to delete features and pricing, and I'm going to go ahead and just delete the form. So let's save that. And because we deleted those components, we no longer need to import them. All right, so we have a link to home, and we also have search. So instead of it saying search, I want it to say create a snippet. And home could actually go to an href of this / so that we can actually go back to home. When I click it, it's actually trying to refresh the page. So that's pretty good. And this button, when you click it, it should redirect you to a new page, which for right now, we're going to pretend like that page is going to be called create-snippet. So I can say href on the button and say /create snippet. And now, to demo that, if I click on this button, it's going to redirect me to a page that doesn't exist. I get a 404, and that is a good starting point. So let's just gut all this stuff out and actually just put some placeholder text. So if I go to index.js, this is like the home page. So I didn't really explain the pages here. So index.js, index.js, inside of this pages directory is your main home page. And this underscore app.js is kind of like a wrapper over all your components and all your pages. So this right here, depending on what route you take, is going to inject a different component. So in this case, if we hit the home page, it's going to inject whatever is in this index.js, which happens to be this home component. But if I was on a different page, it's going to inject a different component to render a different view. So with that being said, let's go to our home page. And what we can do is start removing all the stuff that we don't necessarily need. So I'm going to just go ahead and get rid of the main and also the footer. And inside of here, we can say welcome to paste bucket. That's what I'm going to call it, paste bucket. So if I go back here, we just have a header up here that says welcome to paste bucket in the tab. And instead of navbar here, I should probably change this to the logo or the name of our application. So let me go back to app.js. And inside of this, where it says the brand, I'm going to change this to paste bucket. All right. So the last thing I should probably do on this homepage is put some title, some text to explain what this app is, and maybe a button that someone can click to go create their snippet. So let's go back to index.js. And we are going to create title here. Well, welcome to paste bucket. And underneath that, I will put a paragraph tag to explain what this app is. So this is an application for people to upload and share various snippets of text. All right, so going back, we got this, welcome to paste bucket. This is an application for people to upload and share various snippets of text. And one thing I don't like is all this, I guess the padding's okay. We could style that later. But I want to add a button, kind of like a call to action, so that they know they can click the button to go to the next page. So similar to the navbar, I'm just going to go ahead and copy out that button here, and I'm going to go and paste that inside of this component. It's going to go to the same page. It's going to look the same, but in order for this to work, we got to make sure we auto import it from React Bootstrap. I don't know why it's not importing correctly. Sometimes VS Code just doesn't work. I contemplate switching to a different thing, but I don't know why it's trying to auto default to Bootstrap. Anyway, so if we go back, we have welcome to paste bucket. Click here to create a snippet, and when you click it, it takes you to your create page. So the next step is we want to create a form, maybe a title and another paragraph tag to explain what you're doing to the user. and a button for them to be able to submit that text snippet. So let's just go ahead and do that. So in order to create new pages, you'll notice that we're going to a new page called Create Snippet. And in order for us to be able to create the component for that URL, all we need to do is inside of our Pages folder here, we make a new file called create-snippet. So it's going to match the kind of like the URL structure. So every folder and file that you have in here is going to match and map back to the URL that you use for your application. So if I do a create snippet JS file, and I'd go ahead and return a component called create snippet here. If I put like hello world in here, we should see that come up when we try to refresh this page. Oh, make sure you do default export. You know what? Let me just make sure I'm doing this right. Default export function. Export default function. All right, let's just keep it consistent with how it is on the other page, but all right, there we go. So ran into a little bug, but it wasn't that big of a deal to fix. So what we want to do on this page again is we want to maybe have a title that says something. So I could say H1 is a upload your snippet now, instead of it saying hello world. And then again, a paragraph tag to explain. Paste whatever text you want in the text area below. Save it and share the link with friends. So something as simple as that. Go back over here and we see that show up. Now what I want to do is maybe text align the centers like it was on the other page. So what I could do with Bootstrap, we have some built-in classes. So I could say text center, and that'll center it. And then maybe also add some margin to the top. So I'll say margin top of 4. All right, so it looks a little bit better. And now we want a text area. So we can go back to the Bootstrap docs to see how you do a text area. It's pretty straightforward. So on the docs, you go over the components, you go to forms, and you could probably just search for text area. And this one has a good example. So find where we do example text area and grab that form group. Okay, so I might have done that too quick. So we're going to grab this one, and we're going to paste it here. And we need to make sure that we import that. Again, auto import's not working, so let me just manually do it from React Bootstrap. And we want to wrap all this in a form. All right, so now if we go back to our snippet page, we should see a text area. And one thing I will say is that this is pretty big in width. So we don't need a label here. Let's get rid of that. So we probably want to add some type of max width. So it'd be nice to just use maybe a Bootstrap container in some rows and columns to get this to look nicer. So let me go back to app.js, and we could just make sure that everything that we display is actually wrapped in a container. So I'm going to say container. This is a Bootstrap component that we're going to have to import. So let me just go ahead and import that up here. And let me also just do a row. I'll just make sure everything isn't wrapped in a row and one column. Okay, so all of our pages, all of our components will be wrapped in a row and a column. And that'll kind of limit the insides of our text area. Again, it's pretty large, and we can style this to make it look a little smaller. So let's just go back to our create snippet page, and we could just apply some custom stylings to this form control. So over here, I will say style, and I'm going to pass it an object, which is going to have a fixed width of, we'll say 400 pixels. And then also a height of 300 pixels. So just doing a little bit inline styling. And then it's not really centered right now, so we could also maybe add some like margin 0 auto, maybe. Let's see if that centers it. All right, so we have a text area that is centered, and now we just want a button down here that when they click it, it tries to save it. So let me go ahead and again grab a button, and I'm just going to paste it down here inside the form, and I'm going to call it save your snippet. All right, so make sure we auto import this up here, And we need to make sure that instead of doing an href, we actually probably just want to do a click listener to actually do something. But before we do that, when someone types into this text area, we're going to need to store that somewhere in state so that we can grab it later. Whoa. So we need to basically use useStateHook and store whatever they type into this into the state so that we can later use it when we do the post request. So inside of this form control, I'm going to say onChange, and I'm going to have to pass it a function here. So we don't have a function yet, so let me just go ahead and so let's just go ahead and use the useStateHook to make that state variable. So I'm going to say const snippet and set snippet equals useState, and that could be equal to an empty string to start off. And we want to make sure that we import that up here, so useState. And now whenever the input box changes, we just want to pass the value of that. So e set snippet e.target.value. All right, so that was a lot of extra work just so that we can get access to whatever the user typed into the text area. And now when someone clicks save your snippet, we want to do a post request to the backend. So let's make another function called save snippet, which is just going to basically use the fetch API to send off a post request. And we could just go ahead and put an on-click listener here, and that could just say save snippet. All right, so hopefully you're still with me. Hopefully I haven't lost you. But let's just console log here what the snippet text looks like, just to kind of further illustrate what's going on. And I'll load up my console down here and zoom in a little bit. I have a special guest appearance for my daughter. You want to say hi? You want to say hi, Eddie?
Hi.
You want to show them your teddy bear? You'll probably just hang out with me for a little bit, and then she'll want to leave and go play. So, all right. So let's verify that the console log that we added to that callback function is printing out. So if I click on this, it prints out snippet. So we are good. So what we're trying to do is we need to send some data over to the backend. So let's just expand this a little bit. And we need to just do a post request to some endpoint that we haven't created yet. So what I'm going to do is, instead of just console logging, I'm going to just use the fetch command, and I'm going to pass it an endpoint of API slash snippets, I guess. And then we could pass a second argument, which will be an object that has like some options. So method can be post, and I think it's body, and I could say json.stringify, and then I could just pass in the snippet. So I think we also might need headers, and we might need to say that the header is content type application slash JSON. All right, so at this point, what we could do is click on the button and verify that it tries to make a network request to the endpoint. And if you look at this, we have a failed request, and it's hitting this endpoint here. And if we look at the payload, we see that it's passing a snippet of an empty string. So let's just make sure that if we type in some stuff here and we try that again, we actually try to send over real data to the backend, and we do. Okay, so now for the fun part is we need to set up an API endpoint on Nest.js or Next.js to accept that payload and then also write it to MongoDB. So going back over to the code, there is an API folder that's nested inside the pages folder, and we could just pretty much rename hello to be snippets, and that will allow us to basically hit a /API/snippets endpoint. So if I were to just run this again, I'll show you what's going to happen. So run it again, we actually get a response back this time, and the response says name John Doe. Now the issue with this is that you could do a GET request of this, you could do a patch, a put. What we only want to do is listen for post requests here. So I could say if rec.method is equal to post, then we do some stuff. And then else I could probably just throw new error, HTTP method not supported on this endpoint. Okay, so if I were to do a GET request there, it should API/snippets, it should just throw an error, and that's about it. All right, so now I click save, it still works, but we are now hitting this post if statement. And what we need to do is we need to actually save that data to MongoDB. So we haven't set up a MongoDB connection or anything like that. So let's make a new folder called utils here. And inside of that, I'm going to make a file called db.js. And that's just going to export a function that we can call to kind of set up the Mongoose connection. So going to the Mongoose docs on npm, let's see if they give us a good example of how to use this. It should be straightforward. So first of all, we can require it. In fact, I should probably import it, right? Not require. So I'm going to import it. And then we can connect to our database. Like so. And I'll call this snippets. I'm going to call this paste bucket. All right. And these are just some options that I think you have to send in. I'm not too sure. You can read up on those if you want. I'm sure they explain it just right around here. And what we want to do is we want to have this file export a function which we can use to basically set up this connection. So instead of running this every single time, every time you hit an endpoint, you kind of only want to do it once. So I'm going to just set up a boolean that says like is connected equal to false. And I'm going to export a function. So export const connect is a function that is going to run this code if we haven't already connected. So if we're not connected, then we need to set up this connection. We haven't already connected, just connect to it. And this will allow us to use and actually invoke commands on the MongoDB later on. So let's move on to making another folder called models. So I'll make a new folder here called models. And inside of that, I'm going to put one called snippets. Or just snippet, sorry. And following their documentation, they tell you this is how you can make a schema. So let's just copy this in. We need to make sure we also import Mongoose. So I'm going to go ahead and at the top of this, import Mongoose. And we could define a schema here. And we want to define a snippet schema, which is going to have a snippet. And it's going to have a slug, I guess I could say. And that's about it. And we could probably have this export const, which will be equal to the following. So basically, I'm going to say, grab the Mongoose model snippet if it exists. Otherwise, we're going to create one. So this is also a little workaround that you kind of have to do to make sure that it doesn't fail when you try to hit the API endpoints, because it's going to try to recreate these every single time. All right, so that should be good. We have a model that we can start using to find and store snippets, and then we have a database that we can use to connect to Mongoose. All right, so the next step is if I go back to the API, when we do a post request here, what we need to do is we need to connect, first of all. So up here, I'm going to import connect from the utils/db, and we can call it. So I'll say await connect. And I believe it needs to be async. So let's go back here and put async here, else this is going to error out. And you know what? I also forgot to set it to true here. So if we're not connected and we just set up a connection, we'll say is connected true. So this is so it doesn't keep on running over and over again. I think I mentioned that. So I think that should be good, hopefully. But yeah, at the start of this route, I'm just going to call connect so that we're good and we're connected to the database in case we haven't gotten connected before. And then inside of here, what we could do is just save that snippet. So I'm going to import snippet first. So import snippet from models/snippet. And what I could do is say snippet.create. I could post it, or I could send it a object that has snippet. So rec.body.snippet. And then we also want to generate a slug. So there's another library I'm using called random text. So I say npm random, or random string, I think it's called. So let's go to that and let's look at it. And to use it, we could just call it like this, and that'll return us a random string with some length. So our slug is going to be equal to, ooh, not slut, let's do slug, yikes. So let's make it 6 characters, and then we could kind of pass that into Mongoose and save it, okay? And then we could probably just get the Mongoose object back. by waiting on it. Make sure we do async here. And then finally we could send it back. So I'm just going to say res.json. All right, so we did a lot of stuff. I hope there's no bugs. I guess we'll find out soon enough. But now when we do that post request from the front end, we should see it return. Okay, it's returning a 500 because it's crashing. Let's figure out why it's crashing. So I'm going to load up my terminal. I'm going to go ahead and look at the terminal down here. It says random string is not defined. Okay, so that is because I forgot to import it. So I'm saying import star as random string from random string. All right, let's try again. All right, this time it did work. We got a 200 status back. And then in our response, we got a slug. And we also got a snippet. So at this point, it would be nice if the UI would just automatically redirect the user to his snippet so that he can kind of share it with other people. So let's make a new endpoint that we can just put in the slug here and then show the snippet text. So I think this is all good. This is all done. So let's go to pages and let's make another endpoint called slug.js. And this is going to be really close to the existing create snippet endpoint. So I'm going to paste that all in. And we're not going to have the ability to save a snippet. We don't need a state. And we could just have some placeholder text here. So let me just clear this out and we can kind of walk you through this. All right, so we don't need... Wait, actually, we do need text area. And the value of this text area is going to be equal to the snippet that we get from the backend. So let's get rid of this button as well. All right, kind of jumping all over the place. So in Next, there is the ability to kind of have the backend do some initial data fetching before it sends back a response to the user. And that is what we want to do here. But I need to look that up because I don't remember what it is. Called static props, maybe. Oh, like server something. Server. Let's see, data fetching. Get server side props. I think this is what we want. So if you have your file export this, basically you can fetch something from a backend or a database here and then pass it in props, which will then get passed to here in props and then you can use it. So what we want to do is we want to fetch that snippet that the person just created using the slug ID. So I'm going to say get the slug from context.params.slug. Just to make sure this is right, it has params here. So if you see in the docs, they tell you that context has a params that you can use to get the slug. And the reason this is slug is because the file is actually named slug inside of these square brackets. So what we want to do is we want to fetch the snippet information from the database using that slug. So again, we're going to have to import the model. I'm going to say import snippet from models.snippet. And we're going to want to connect as well. So let's make sure we bring in that connect thing. If I were to go back to this, let me make sure that we call it up here. All right, auto import's actually working this time. So we're going to connect first, just so we have access to hit the database. We're going to get the slug ID from the context, and then we're going to say get the slug object from our snippet. Or I'm sorry, I'm gonna call it snippet object. From snippet.find one, and then we want to find where the slug matches. So I'm just going to put slug here. And then finally, we could just pass that in params or props here. I could say snippet text is equal to snippet object.snippet. And I think that's it. We'll find out in a second if this is actually going to work. So we need to pass it in the props here. So I'm going to say snippet text. And then we could just set the value of that input box or text area to be that by default. And I'm going to disable that so that people can't change it. And we don't need to worry about, let's see, disable. Is it called disable or disabled? I think it's called disabled. I'll put snippet. Anyway. All right, let's try that out. Let's see what happens. So the second thing I want to do before we test that out is when you actually save your snippet, you probably want to refresh or you want to change your your UI to another route. So we can go back to this create snippet page here, and we want to pretty much bring in the router. So if I go back to the docs for Next.js, there is routing available to us that I think you can just use a hook. So let me just bring in this. Let me see if they have use router here. Click on this. All right, so if I import next/router at the top, that gives me access to say const router is equal to router. And then what I could do is when I save the snippet successfully, so I'm going to await on it, I could use the response that comes back. I'll say const response is equal to this. And then I'm going to say snippet is equal to, or snippet created. I'll say created snippet is equal to await response.json. This is just the format that you have to use for the fetch API. They return a promise, and then you have to call response.json again to get back the thing that was returned from the server. And then what we want to do is we want to say router.push, and we could push in a URL. So in this case, we want to navigate the user to /created snippet.slug. So there was a lot of stuff happening right there. We created a backend connection with Mongoose. We created a backend endpoint for creating a snippet. We created a new page that you can view the snippet, and we're kind of linking it all together to allow you to be navigated to that page once you've created your snippet. So hopefully, if I go over here, if I go over here and get rid of this error by putting async here. Now, let's clear out the network tab. I'll type some stuff. I'll click save your snippet. And notice that it redirected me to the slug that was randomly created on our backend. So now at this point, anyone could simply load up a tab and go to that URL, and they could see the exact same snippet of text that someone else saved. Or you could bookmark it and come back later and save that. So we are basically almost done. The last thing I think would be really useful is maybe have a button that'll automatically copy this to your clipboard. Okay. So there was another package I think I installed called like copy clipboard. Clipboard copy. Okay. This one is really straightforward. You just basically, whatever page that you're trying to add that functionality in, which would be the slug page, we could import star as copy from that. And then whenever you call the copy method, it's going to basically put some text directly on your clipboard. So let's add a button to, let's say the button could be above this text here. So I'll add a button, and that button will say copy to clipboard, copy snippet. No, copy link to clipboard. How about that? I think I just import copy. We'll see if that works. And then when you click on this button, which I should probably give I probably want to make it look like the other stuff. So let's go and find out what variation we use for those. So let me copy the variant in here. Copy link to clipboard. Probably add some border bottom 4 to that because it's really close to that. And maybe some margin top 2. All right, so now the point is when you click on this button, you want to copy this link so that you can share it with people. So what I'm going to do is add a click listener here and say on click. We basically want to call something that is going to call that copy command, but then it's also going to put the window.location onto the user's clipboard. All right, so let's make sure this works. If I were to, let's say, copy some text and verify, you can see that the ASWDF, whatever, is on my clipboard. If I click on this, we now have that URL on our clipboard. So now it makes it really user-friendly for someone to come here. They can create a snippet, what is up world, and they can submit it, and then they can copy it, and then they can go ahead and paste that link to someone else if they wanted to share it. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You have a fully working Next.js application for uploading some code snippets or text snippets, for saving them in the MongoDB, and for retrieving them and sharing them amongst your friends, or just bookmarking them to use at a later point. Okay, and if I wasn't going to cut this tutorial short, there's probably more improvements you could add. You could make it so that there's a max length to this, because anyone could paste in 1,000,000 characters, save it to your backend, and probably flood your database with data, which would not be good. You could probably also add in support for different type of programming languages here. Like you could use some type of text editor highlighting here, or use a pre-tag or something. There's a lot you could do. What else could you potentially do? You could have some type of authentication to log in and log out and to save snippets to your account, kind of like CodePen or whatever. So feel free to expand upon this idea and add whatever you want to it. I think it'd be a good way to challenge your knowledge of Next.js, MongoDB, Node, JavaScript, React, all those things. And if you saw how easy it was, I mean, I was kind of flying through this pretty quick. So I'm sure there's some stuff that I could have explained better, but I think some of the most confusing parts of this are like just some of these fallback things you have to do to get MongoDB working, like you having to call connect every single time you hit an API endpoint. A little bit confusing, like the fact you have to do this. So you might want to be able to abstract this into a helper function so you don't have to keep calling it over and over again. What else should I talk about? And then another thing you could try doing is try to find like a free MongoDB host. I'm sure there's one out there, like MLabs. I haven't really used one before, but I think you could find one that's free up to a certain amount. Like this one says get started free. And then what you could do is simply in your db.js file, instead of connecting to the local host, you connect to the remote MongoDB with like an IP address or some type of URL, and everything should work. And then at that point, you could just deploy your Next.js app on Vercel, which I think has, built-in support for Next.js, and you could deploy your app out there and it would just run and connect to your MongoDB database and everything would be good. So I'll probably come back and I may do a tutorial on how to do that. Let me know if you want to see that, and I will make a part 2 of this and just kind of show you how to deploy it. But if you're not interested, then I guess I won't do it. Alright, so that wraps up this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed watching this. If you have any suggestions or feedback, let me know. And you have more ideas of things I could try to build for you all, also let me know. There's a couple of requests that people have made. They want to see like JWT authentication in React and authorization, so I may try to do that soon. I think there's a couple of others, so I need to go back and reread those comments because I forgot what people have asked for. But people like to see React stuff, so I think I'm going to keep on making some React stuff for you all, and maybe just a couple of random stuff if I get bored with React. Cool. All right. Well, have a good day, y'all. I hope this was helpful, and happy coding.